So, I am Christina Henderson, Executive Director of the Montana High Tech Business Alliance. Welcome to the AI Mindset Uses, Approach, Cost, presented in partnership with Speridian Technologies. There is no shortage of conversation right now about both the promise and the risks of AI. And today we want to get practical. Where are businesses actually finding value? What should organizations be cautious about? And how can leaders make smart decisions about where AI is worth the investment? We're recording today's session, and the recording will be shared with everyone who registered. We'll also have time for your questions, so please feel free to add them to the chat throughout the conversation. I am pleased to be joined by three AI leaders from Speridian who bring different perspectives to this conversation. Roji Phillip is Global Head of Speridian's Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. He brings nearly 3 decades of technology leadership experience with expertise in generative and agentic AI, machine learning, AI governance, automation, and digital transformation. He holds a master's degree in computer applications and postgraduate credentials in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Roy is Vice President of Consulting and Advisory Services at Speridian with more than 28 years of experience in business and technology consulting. He specializes in identifying high ROI AI initiatives and developing transformation strategies. Roy also serves on the advisory board for Loyola Marymount University's College of Business Administration and regularly lectures on AI and digital transformation. Shai Lieb is an enterprise architect at Speridian, focused on creating secure, scalable AI and data solutions. Before joining Speridian, he founded Ask Ziggy, where he developed natural language understanding technology and was awarded 3 patents. He brings both an entrepreneurial and enterprise perspective to turning emerging AI technologies into practical business solutions. Thank you all for joining us. Let's begin by putting AI in perspective. When we talk about AI today, it can sound like an entirely new technological revolution, but businesses have actually been using forms of AI for quite a while. What has changed and what makes this moment different? And maybe we'll start with Shai and then hear from Roy and Roji.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And nice to meet all you guys virtually. I was thinking about going back 10 or 20 years because we have seen AI back then, but actually so much has changed in the last 2 to 3 years. The evolution of AI has been so rapid, from answering questions to making recommendations and now to taking actions. And so what we see now is a major pivot within the workplace and how people interact and work with AI. And so one of the big questions that people have, and they're trying to get their minds and their processes around this, is as AI's capabilities grow, how do we deal with the increased risk, right, with that increased capability? So you have that escalation from answering questions, which means, well, is the answer, is it correct? And making recommendations, is it making the correct recommendations? And are people following those recommendations blindly? And then there's taking actions. How much autonomy do you give these agents? So now what you see, the focus recently is controlling AI's capability, right? So we want to harness its capability to actually have repeatable and more deterministic outcomes in some cases because we want it to perform workflows. So the evolution has been really rapid. You start hearing new terms now, people talking about harnesses, looping, where you have AI prompting itself, and then also graph engineering, which is patterns in which AI agents can all act autonomously and independent. So terminology has changed, people's roles have pivoted, and the outcomes are different.
Thanks, Christina, for having me here. And as Shai mentioned, we are using AI for 20 plus years. We all know Google Maps, we have seen Netflix recommendation, we have used weather forecasts to plan our events and vacations. So AI was there in our lives, and it was there through certain products and services. We may not have realized it directly. High-tech companies were adopting it slowly. Today, it is different because it is accessible to all of us directly. And it has also reached the middle tier of business operations. So we are required to use it in everything, whatever we do in our daily lives, in our work. And it also makes us so efficient. And Shai talked about those things. The point solutions that were available earlier, let's say, machine learning or speech to text conversion, etc., all are now available to us in a package to carry out multi-step, autonomous functions, and which uses our preferences, choices, policies, and thinking like us. So this moment is very different and very exciting, and at the same time, as Shai was saying, it is a powerful tool, and it is costly. It has certain risks associated with it, so it has to be used judiciously, and there are certain deterministic factors. You will always hear that I don't get the results the same I ask question 5 minutes apart, and there is a reason behind it, how it works. And if you look back to the Google Map thing, we all use it today, right? Like we put our address to go somewhere, we get a time, ETA, direction, we might call our friends or whoever we're meeting that this is the time I'm reaching, 10:15, but we reach there at 10:19. We are never suing Google back that why it is 10:19, not 10:15. But the businesses are different. They need a technology that can be trusted 100% of time, and so if you think of underwriters or claim adjudicators, they can't do straight through processing if those are not 100% correct. And I think that's where human in the loop come in, but it's a very powerful tool that we all need to adapt to it. Over to you, Raji.
Thanks, Roy, and thanks for having me here on this webinar. From my perspective is, I think, Roy, you already talked about accessibility, right? It's far more prevalent in our lives daily and even in business. So the way I think about it is, AI used to predict a lot during the machine learning times. And then we moved on to AI that generates content or generate images, etc. But now we are getting into an era of where AI can plan and act. So it's that shift that is happening right now. And then maybe just one bit of a caution, right? It is more of, doesn't have to be AI for everything. There are still space for traditional analytics, the workflow automations and just hardcore software development. Because you don't have to use AI for calculations, right? I mean, you could use a calculator, or you could definitely write the software code for it, right? So I think we have to be careful about it and not just try to put AI into everything. But yeah, we should use AI where it is required. And that's the beauty of it.
As we look at this new accessibility of AI and business leaders are making decisions about where to deploy it, if there's someone leading a Montana business wondering how AI can best help, what are some high impact examples you're seeing of useful, proven applications? And maybe we'll start with Roy and then go to the others.
So I face this question every day, which industries will be benefiting the most by AI? And the answer is every industry is getting value from AI. Finance is seeing faster analysis and smarter risk detection. Education is moving towards personalized learning at scale. Law firms are using AI for research, for drafting, for review of legal documents. Manufacturing is becoming more automated and predictive using humanoid robots. Retail and logistics is more efficient, more responsive and data-driven. And needless to say that creative industries are changing at a fast pace, right? Like design, manufacturing, media, content creation, all are being transformed by tools that can generate, summarize, and personalize at speed. So the question is no longer will AI benefit my industry? And within the Montana business, I would say it is all of these industries come around that. So the real question is how deeply and how quickly. And that's where we can think of, okay, what are the AI solutions available to us? And there are a few ways to categorize that. And you must have heard about that horizontal AI and vertical AI. That's a one way to think about it. Horizontal AI are the AI's solutions that you can apply to any industry that I just mentioned. For example, like document extraction, summarization of your email or meeting notes, or ticket triaging, voice bot, chat bot, email bot. These are horizontal AIs you can apply and to any industry. And then there are vertical AIs which are very specific to any industry, and they are trained by the knowledge, data, process, policies, compliance of that particular that particular industry. Now, there is another way for business to look at AI, is that the easy hanging fruits, the mundane jobs, which doesn't get too much attention but brings a lot of quick value. The same one, the horizontal AIs, the point solutions, if you apply them independently, you get a lot of value. Then there is another stage where all our organizations have a lot of data buried in different places. For example, in our servers, on-prem, on cloud, SharePoint, some databases, some SaaS applications and all. Now AI has that power of that retrieval of that knowledge, meaningfully, and helping those mundane jobs take decisions, more intelligently. So that's the knowledge retrieval. And you probably have heard about RAG, which is exactly that, retrieval augmented generation. And the last part of this category would be that workflow automation, the agentic AI. Everybody is talking and hearing about it. What is that? It is nothing but combination of those horizontal AIs or mundane AIs with knowledge retrieval, and having them work in combination, doing multi-step functions. And so if for anybody in the business should think about that, okay, can I identify these three categories? Can I go step by step? And we will see value out of it. And I'm sure we'll talk about a little more of this and the nuances involved in these three later. But for now, I think, Christina, over to you.
So I would put it in three buckets, right? Employee productivity. How can we help our employees with AI, right? Summarization. I think Roy mentions for the examples, right? Summarization, document analysis, a lot of meeting summaries, etc., right? The second part is your processes. How do we make your processes more productive? We normally measure employee productivity, but do we measure process productivity, right? Just take any of your processes, whether it is customer service or claims handling or case handling or etc., right? What is the time it takes right from the time the case comes to us till the time the case is solved? So is our processes getting better with AI? And last but not the least, the whole experience that you are giving to your customers, right? There could be conversational service, personalized interactions, faster responses, and more. It's still trying to be personal. We're not trying to make it automated bot responses, but still keeping in the personal touch, right? So I think if you look at it in that angle, there's definitely a lot more that you can look at it. If you have 100 people in your business, employees in your business, how do we make them better? How do we make your processes better? But more importantly, keep your customer center, right? And how do we make them better because of the way we interact with them? And all of these three things can be a place where AI really brings in that value.
Let's shift to best practices for AI implementation. Once an organization has identified a good use case, what separates a successful AI implementation from one that struggles?
I think the main part of it is, are we just simply trying to put AI on top of something and saying, hey, let's figure out what happens, right? I think the main part of it is the business ownership of the process, right? The user's involvement, right? I mean, like I said before, right? It's the customer at the center, or your employees at the center. And how is it helping them, right? They need to be part of the whole development process, right? I think that is something we should do. The second part is measuring, right? Is it just native knowledge that we are saying that, oh, it used to take 3 days and now with AI it's taking it? Or is it solid facts that we are putting in front of, when we're trying to look at that measurement, right? So I think if the entire ownership, and let's take an example of, let's say within all our organizations, we have HR, right? And we want to bring in AI for HR, right? But who's the owner? Is it IT? Is it the AI Center of Excellence? Or is it HR, right? And, the processes need to be streamlined. There's a lot of variability in the same process, right? And there are a lot of exceptions, right? I mean, you can ask any HR person. But I think if we can bring in a streamlined process, now by bringing in AI and automation, we make it better. But if a process itself is, a lot of exceptions and, in the whole process, then by adding AI and automation is probably going to make it more worse. So I think all of us as business owners and as organizations need to take a look at our processes, and make sure that they are streamlined, optimized, and that's when we can definitely bring in the successful implementation of AI. We normally struggle when the process itself, nobody owns it, nobody knows who's the owner. You get different pieces of opinion coming from different HR people, and then the whole thing just falls apart. I just gave HR as an example, but if you can just adapt it to every bit of other processes, I think that would be a very good thing to look at, right? Ownership and making sure that your process itself is more efficient before we try to bring in AI.
Dive from the technology side, what best practices help organizations build AI systems that are reliable, scalable, manageable, and prevent some of these hangups?
Yeah, one of the key things when you're thinking about adopting AI is to think about your governance first, right? So you don't want to start with the assumption that we're going to keep our agents from causing a disaster, from leaking data or making the wrong decisions, right? So you have to think from an architectural standpoint, what is the blast radius, right? So the blast radius is how much damage based on the capability that you're giving AI, how much access you're giving it, can you manage? And so when you're thinking about governance, you're thinking about security, access, permissions to the different agents. What you're seeing now with different patterns is that you don't have one agent do everything. So you typically create multiple agents, like you would have different employees with different specialties. And so each one of those agents, when you can make it lean and give it lean permission so that it can only do what it needs to do as far as a job, that's one way of controlling access. And then you may have heard of sandboxing, and there's different patterns in which you can deploy agents so that their access is limited to other network resources. The other thing with governance and policy, some organizations are very sensitive to the way people prompt. And a lot of people don't really think about that, but doing prompt sanitization, what people are asking, are they using the correct words and terminology? And so you can actually sanitize the prompt, you can report on it, and that ties into the next thing, which is observability. You don't want your agents just to run and just look at the outcomes at the end of the tunnel, right? You want to be able to see how your agents are performing, not only from a performance standpoint, but also in terms of are there any errors? Is there any kind of data leakage? Is there any access issues? And all these things, there's different observability platforms that are out there that can do that. Splunk, there's Datadog. And so that's what we see as organizations really take a serious look at making sure that their governance is in place before they actually implement AI.
Christina, if I may add,
Go ahead.
you asked about best practices, and when we talk about best practice means we have done this over and over again, and then we know what is the best. So one thing to be remember that we are still in the early adoption phase of AI. So what we are doing is we are applying all the best practices that we have learned of adopting new technologies of the last 25 years. And then we are also learning, and every day new models, new things are coming up, and we are implementing them, even learning new things, so I think it's important that, okay, we start with a best practice that have worked, but be very agile to monitor and adopt and change and not think that, okay, that is the right best at this point of time.
Excellent advice. Speaking of being agile, let's talk about keeping up with risk. We hear everything from hallucinations, data exposure, runaway costs, workforce disruption, and AI agents acting beyond their authority. Which of these risks do you think are most real and immediate for businesses today, and how can they be avoided? Maybe let's start with Roji and then open it up to all.
I think the first thing to look at is how critical are those processes, right? Are you drafting emails? Is it a low risk process, right? That's one thing, right? But are you taking actions like underwriting, which is, a very important thing, and there's a lot of decision making before we do underwriting, right? So you shouldn't be giving a good loan to a bad person or a bad loan to a good person. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that, AI can hallucinate. It can get exposed to wrong data, right? So the more important thing is, how are we, and I think Shai mentioned it in the previous comment about observability. Does leadership know what data is being used by which model and for what, right? I think that's a very important thing, right? So we got to look at the consequences of where we are using AI. If it is low risk, it's okay. But if it is, something like loan decision making or medical interventions, then yeah, we would definitely have to look at that, right? So I think sometimes you don't have to use AI always, right? I mean, that's the point, right? Now that it is more accessible, people want to use AI more, but sometimes you don't need to do it. And I think the earlier part of it, why we spoke about deterministic, right? If you have certain rules in place, and you need a definite answer, or maybe AI or generative AI does not come into play. But if it is something that is probabilistic, right? So where it's okay, you won't get the same answer, but it means the same thing, then that's also another place where we would use AI. So I think from a risk perspective, we need to really worry about whether AI is generating the wrong answers. And by the way, that's a skill that we have to have. You can't just trust AI, at the moment. It's just like a new employee that is joining your organization. It takes time for you to know, but you have to know what it is doing behind the scenes. So, that's my point of view on it.
And you have to realize, some of these agents actually look at about 1 million words at a time, right? 1 million tokens, they're not quite all words. And so, it feels like it's very turnkey with agents, right? And we take it for granted, but even agents have to do memory management, right? So when it comes to hallucinations, when you realize, wow, there's all this contextual content that agents look at before they actually perform any actions. And so there are new techniques, there's documentation, and sometimes, different agents like Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, they may manage the memory in slightly different ways. They call it a context window. But there are techniques, for example, on how you manage skills for different agents. What's the format for those skills? How much content do you put into a skill, right? So when you're talking about, a lot of people want to have one agent that can do everything, and it's got a skill document that's a couple pages long. And what a lot of people don't realize, even with some caching, agents have to read those documents before they perform a new action. And so you're constantly feeding into that context window. You get to that maximum of 1 million tokens, and that's one of the bigger models, right? So not every model has that size context window, and it'll start truncating, right? So it'll start removing some of that context that you put early on, and then you start realizing, well, the agent's hallucinating. Well, the agent no longer remembers what you told it about 20 minutes ago. And so, with multiple agents and orchestrations, they all manage their own context windows, so that helps relieve some of that memory pressure. But those are some of the things that, from an engineering standpoint, that these are the issues and the challenges that we now have to look and optimizing to help alleviate some of that risk for hallucination.
Thank you, Shai. So I think all of them are real risks, and as you mentioned, however, they need to be understood thoroughly to be mitigated. So let me talk about the one you mentioned, Christina, which applies to all of us, which is workforce disruption and sometimes future of jobs, and both are being talked in the same context. So we are all hearing this, right? Like layoffs, job reductions, no new openings due to AI. These are partially true and varies by industry. The truth is, we don't know exactly how the future of jobs will look. However, we can say that there will be enough jobs of different nature. So immediately, the folks who are augmenting AI will have a lot of opportunities. Second, we are seeing that the knowledge of domain will be a differentiating factor. So whoever is augmenting AI and knows the domain will have enough to do. And if we take an example of this IT industry, technology where we come from, this tech industry was based out of coding scarcity, and now it's coding abundance. Claude can generate thousands and thousands of lines of code in a single prompt. But abundance of code doesn't mean the reliable software. That's where the opportunity is. If you look at it in a different way, like in the human component of developing a unit of software is decreasing. The number of humans required to develop per unit software will be less. We know that, which means the number of unit software developed per unit time will increase. So by Jevons law or paradox, when the cost of production decreases, the demand increases. So we can assume that there will be more need for software and humans. So this is a different perspective to think about on workforce disruption. Now, while we talk about all these possibilities of AI, and so how this risk can be avoided. So yes, we have to talk about the containment part, So large enterprises, government, all of us has a role to play there. First, we must establish guardrails in how we develop AI and deploy AI. Transparency, accountability, the security around it, the fairness around it. Second, we must invest in workforce transition. That means that there should be programs of retraining, education reforms, and support for workforce whose roles are being transitioned and transformed. That's very important. And the third, I think that we must protect the public interest. If AI is deployed in an opaque way, biased, unsafe, adoption will be very less and there will be backlash. So the goal should be that the containment is not in the sense of restriction, but the containment in the sense of control, oversight, alignment with public interest.
There's a perception that AI can become extraordinarily expensive. How I guess I'll start with Roy. Why does AI cost more than many organizations initially expect?
Good question. We are dealing this every day today. In one line, I would say lack of understanding of the commercial architecture, or in single word, AI FinOps. I'm sure this word FinOps is very common, everybody knows. See, AI is a powerful tool, and anything powerful is costly, at least at the beginning, till it is not. And in our context, till the time the infrastructure required to run all these models becomes extremely cheaper. And also we have to understand a huge amount of investment dollars have gone behind building these models. So commercialization is natural. Now, if we understand that structure, we can minimize it, control it. And there are various ways of how AI costs are calculated, or accumulated. And AI is measured in usage of tokens, we all know, right? But then all tokens are not created equal. So I would say we have to have an understanding of the input token versus output tokens. Output tokens cost much more. Then the modality of our prompts and our outputs. Like if you are just giving text and expecting text back, it costs less. But you input an image and expect an image out of it, it changes. Same with audio, same with video. So that modality is also the reason. And then I can think of model tiers. So, every day, every hyperscalers or AI companies coming up with different models, which is better than the previous one. Now, do you really need a sophisticated model for something that you are doing? Maybe not. And there is a saying in AI architecture that you need a better data and a less sophisticated model to get the right results. So don't go for the premium model and pay premium charges. And last but not the least is the context window creep, which is I think it grows exponentially. The most biggest component of the AI cost is when we ask a question to AI, it gives me a response, whatever, text or any model. But when I ask back another question based on that, it is growing that number of tokens, in a cumulative way. So it is in 3 iterations, the number of tokens used for input and output has grown exponentially. That is the biggest challenge, and there is a way to control it, and that's the AI FinOps, and a lot of organizations now talking about it because we have now come to the AI productionization from POCs.
Yeah, another angle from this too is to have the right metrics in place so that you can determine if you are being productive and how you use AI. I'll give you an example. Like for a development team, you can probably see that there's a lot of AI-assisted code being generated by a development team using AI. But that doesn't mean that they're being productive. How much of that code has to be rewritten? How much of that code actually makes it through testing? Does it even meet our requirements, right? So you have to redefine the metrics. And actually, this metric has always been there, and that is how much code actually makes it to production. That's typically how you look at a developer if they're being productive. And so for the very same thing, now it's more like 5x, 10x, maybe even 50x in terms of speed. But you want to see how much of that code actually goes into production, and you can track it. And so there are capabilities within different code repositories where you can track the entire life cycle of code that's being generated from the beginning, if it's AI assisted, in terms of AI suggested the code, but maybe the developer put it in themselves, versus AI actually suggested and generated the code. And that code follows through the entire process where it went through unit testing, QA testing, and made it all the way into production. The other thing is coaching. So you're redefining how you're coaching developers and also other members such as product owners, project managers, and also leadership. When it comes to documentation as well. And so if you are creating a document and you're making a recommendation, one of the things, and this makes you more efficient, doesn't necessarily save you tokens, but it makes you more productive in that you can use a knowledge base, and that knowledge base could contain templates on how you generate certain documents. And so AI assisted generation can look at those templates and then give you that same reproducible output that you would have. And then also another example is from an architectural standpoint. So this is one of the biggest challenges for any development team is that you have developers and architects proposing new architectures. Well, they always have to go back to what's our existing architecture? What do we currently have that we can leverage versus recreating from scratch? And so where AI can help you speed that up and where you can save time in how you use AI is again to have all those architectural assets within a knowledge base that the agents can access so that they're not trying to create a new architecture from scratch. So there's different techniques, there's additional coaching, and then defining the type of metrics and KPIs that you want.
So if I can just make one addition to all of this, look, at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve, right? I mean, we can measure token costs and all of that, but I'd rather everybody look at it from a business angle, right? The goal isn't to meet the AI cost. It is actually maximizing your business value for every dollar that you spend for AI, correct? I think if by using AI, you can increase your business value or the margins or the revenues or whatever, however way you look at it, I think that's what matters more than, just by looking at per transaction AI cost. Because, honestly, there is the infrastructure part of it. There is, a lot more than just AI costs, right? So I think we need to look at it from what's the value or the business value that we generate by implementing AI. And that is more important. I mean, you could spend $5,000 on a solution that nobody's using, and that's a wasted expense, right? So I would think that way. So we need to look at it from a business angle more than just the infrastructure cost.
Koji, the title of today's webinar is the AI mindset. What do you think is key to instilling an AI mindset at any organization?
Well, I think many often we are asked this question, how can AI automate this report? Or why can't we use AI in this thing, right? And going back to my original statement, right? It's not just because somebody has done AI, so we need to do AI. The question is always going to be do we really need this process? Do we really need this report to be generated? Who needs this information? Can AI help automate it, right? I think that is the native thinking. And look, when we were looking at it within Speridian, I think one of the things is that we went across the entire organization and said, hey, bring in your ideas, and within an hour, build a AI prototype, right? So we are asking now people to imbibe that culture of using AI rather than just, putting them through training programs and, forcing them to use AI. I think more of it is that, we want to make sure that people develop that mindset, right? Solving problems using AI. And I think we have to give them, as employers, we have to make sure that they have access to safe tools, right? And real problems. And, there needs to be a little bit of permission to experiment without going haywire and exposing all your company data. I think that's more important. But I think questioning or trying to, like I said, straightening the process to make sure that it is AI native, right? That's something that we should look at, right? And not just trying to, I use the analogy of putting salt and pepper on your food to make it taste better. That's not what we are trying to do, right? We have to make sure that AI is there in all the processes, but like I also said, it's not necessary that we use AI always, right?
Roy and Shai, would you add anything? Have you seen cultural or leadership shifts that seem to make a bigger difference?
I think Roji touched upon that point, and you mentioned cultural, right? It has to be cultural. It has to be cultural initiative. It has to be a top-down initiative that, okay, why we need to do it, and not just look at it, okay, because everybody is doing it, I have to do it. So the thought process is that it's a powerful tool available to us. Where can we use it? And so look at your business processes, identify which are critical, which needs certain changes that will yield a lot of your value. Now, all business looks for what? Increase of revenue, increase of margin. I want to be compliant. So in these three things, where you can do, that's the top-down approach, and you identify, and there's a whole process. The other way to look at it is to that, okay, I understand this tool is powerful. I have not done anything. I'm talking about the leadership group, the thinking, what is my AI maturity? So there are assessments you can do at every level of your functions, from technology and business, to say, okay, what is my maturity score? So, scale of 5, do I stand at 1 or 3 or 4? That also will give you. And this two approach should culminate in what kind of initiatives you take, what kind of dollars you put towards the AI investments.
Yeah, and in terms of what I've seen is that the companies that usually succeed with AI, they have a measurable outcome or objective that they're targeting, right? So we talked about revenue. What's the ROI? How much time am I going to save if I use AI in this process, right? Get away from thinking we can do so many different things with AI, but we don't really have any specific objective that's driving it.
As we transition from our moderated discussion to Q&A with the audience, I'd like to ask each of you the same question. If a business leader is listening today and wants to make smarter use of AI in their organization, what's the number one thing you would tell them to do before embarking on their next AI initiative? And maybe we'll go Roji, Roy, Shai.
The main thing is, I'd like to use an analogy of your everybody has investments. AI is an investment, right? But as with a basket of stocks, some would do good, some would not do good, right? So AI is not like a topping list, right? You are going to use AI, you're going to do it for, some processes where it is really successful. There are also going to be some processes where you implement AI and it's not really yielding its value. So I think that is very important to know that. And I've also seen many places where they still keep on discussing and thinking about doing AI, but they actually don't. My advice is just go ahead and get started. Take a low-risk process and implement it and see how you're getting at, right? And that will give you the confidence to do better and better, right? I mean, I think we are all sitting here trying to bring about, the whole idea of AI implementations, etc. But what you can also understand that there's been, in the past, there have been some failures that we have also done, right? So with that, there is a lot of learning, right? And with all successful projects, also there is learning, right? So definitely go out there and do it. The Nike example is just do it, right? So go out and do it, and you will learn a lot, right? And that's something that you should bring out into it. So as leaders, we can plan a lot. We can predict what could be the ROI and all of that, but I would say just go out there and do it.
No, I think that's right, Reggie. Like, we should get started, right? If we don't get started, we'll not be anywhere. What I think that the understanding of doing AI versus being AI, and what does it mean? The AI here is slightly different. Doing AI is doing artificial intelligence, and being AI is being artificially intelligent. So what's the difference here? And it's not something new. We have seen this 10, 15 years back during the digital transformation when it started, doing digital versus being digital. Everyone was having a shiny object syndrome, which is, I'm going to create a sleek website, I'm going to create a mobile app, I'm going to move all my softwares and servers to cloud. These are all part of digital transformation, but doesn't mean that if you do all this, just you will be digitally transformed. unless you have done a lot more with your systems and thinking. Like your systems are digitally connected, your websites are designed with the design thinking principles, you're augmenting the different true value of cloud, or have you just moved your servers from colo to on-prem to hyperscalers? The same is true for AI. You can be doing AI by deploying those horizontal AIs, mundane AIs, and you will get some benefits, absolutely. But you won't be AI native unless you digitally connect your systems. You have curated your data generated by those systems in a certain format that you can now feed the LLMs or the SLMs, which are fine-tuned, grounded for your industry and business. And then you have deployed an agentic AI solution through smart orchestrations. And even after that, you have to run organization and change management to drive adoption of the smart automations. So any organization embarking on AI journey should have this understanding across the leadership, doing AI versus being AI.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the initial thing that anyone should look at is what problem they're actually trying to solve. And, a lot of times you hear, oh, I want to use agentic AI. So the first thing that you need to do is to educate yourself on the terminology and understand what the different capabilities are within AI. And then when you get to your problem and you're understanding your problem, is it a workflow that's always going to have some outcome? Does it really need AI? If you have a workflow where you have several conditions that it goes from one node to another node to getting you some kind of an outcome, you have to remember AI is predictive by nature, right? And you're trying to harness it, you're trying to control it so that you get that repeatable outcome. And so not all those situations are a good match for AI. In some cases, it's just good old-fashioned conditional workflows. And other situations where you have, for example, you're trying to solve a problem and you're trying to think outside the box. Well, in that situation, you can look to use an autonomous AI agent that can think for itself and can come up with different solutions. But that autonomous agent is not a good fit for your workflows that you want to be repeatable and predictable. And so that's, you have to understand what your problem is and what's the correct match, what's the correct technology, what you want.
Excellent advice all around. We now have some time for questions from the audience. We did have a question submitted in advance, so I'll start there and then we'll jump to the chat. This question draws on Speridian's global perspective. Many government organizations in developing countries haven't started using AI yet. Where should they begin and which areas could benefit first?
So I think, definitely from a government organizations, especially developing countries, where there is low risk, there's a lot of high volume services, right? A good example, I could say, relating to the US part of it is the 311 services in every county. And there's a lot of, low risk services that are there. But this is a fair place for every organization to start, right? So from a government perspective, local counties, etc., there are all of these, and you bring that to a place like India, you have languages, right? You need it in, X number of languages that are there in India, and everybody has different dialects, right? So that's one of the very good areas where AI can be beneficial because, knowledge access or access to information, the latest information, and how do we get it to the citizens, right? So I think those are definite places. And then comes all these service requests, right? I mean, there are so many requests that you have at local level, at the state level, at the federal level, right? So these are certain things that can be tackled, definitely.
We had a question from Austin in the chat. Now that you said, go out and do it, can you talk about OPSEC, data security, and how to structure which layer of the business to integrate AI?
So one of the things that you want to do from a security standpoint is, as you're layering different businesses, you have to understand what are the different resources that you're going to access with your agents. And one of the things that you want to do is to have those guardrails in place. So observability does matter, to be able to track your agents and what they're accessing, if there's any issues. Another thing is, what is your deployment pattern? And the deployment pattern does play into what is amenable in terms of what you're trying to accomplish with the agent versus what access they have. So a lot of times you see a pattern where you're containerizing agents, and that's because you want to sandbox those agents. So that's a pattern that's a little bit more amenable to be able to have tighter control on those agents and to be able to give it access within the network for what that agent needs. And the other thing is specialization within agents, right? So make your agents lean. Don't layer in a lot of access to one individual agent. Have them specialize in doing one or two tasks. And that way you can also manage access a little bit better. The other thing that plays into is your decision on the tech stack. So there's a lot of open source AI agents that are out there that you can use, but you obviously have to come up with a governance from scratch. And so there are some platforms out there, like just to throw a couple out there, like Foundry, Claude, OpenAI, where you operate within that governance structure and the boundaries within that platform. And so what you do have is the ability to treat your agent as what's called a first-class object. So it has the same level of permissions that you would give to an individual. So it does make permission management a little bit easier in that regard.
So it seems like Austin liked that answer, so I think we were successful. So if anybody in the audience has additional questions, please ask them. Otherwise, I've got some more questions I wanted to ask. What mistakes do you see organizations repeatedly making when they first adopt AI? And we'll open this up to everyone.
I think everybody says, let's get AI and then figure out what to do with it, right? I think more importantly, and I keep saying this throughout this 1 hour, but you got to figure out where in your business processes do you want to use AI, rather than getting AI first and then trying to figure out what to do with it. It's not just buying a bunch of licenses, right? I mean, why would you buy a car if you don't know what to do with it, right? So I think that's the simple way of putting it. And definitely that should be the mindset when you want to go forward with it.
I will add to that, that anything, don't apply AI to everything, as Roji mentioned. Anything that can be done via traditional automation, or the low ROI use cases, stay away from it. Even the zero tolerance accuracy use cases where you need to have the human in the loop, think about that. So it's again powerful tool, costly. So select your use cases judiciously. And I can talk about a situation we had, like they were adopting AI and healthcare payer company, and usually their plans, the healthcare provider company, they were comparing plans and using AI for that. And those plan documents were in the range of 50-60 pages. And very soon they realized that as soon as they're comparing two plans, they're exhausting all the budget of AI. And you don't need to put 50-60 pages worth of document to an AI. There are only few sections of that you need to compare between the plans of last year and this year. So you have to have a plan how to use it, and we talked about that cost part of it. So another thing which is very close to me and I would like to share here is that, which is not very visible or upfront to general user, is that every AI request has a carbon footprint. It is consuming power, water, and it is generating heat at some part of the world. So responsible AI usage is a shared responsibility for us. Do not use AI if you do not need it.
Yeah, another thing too is before you start using AI, you should really have a good sense of what your budget is, right? So we talked about cost and budget overruns, but learn how that particular agent, that tech stack, or that platform, how you're being charged, and learn that very well before you run out. And then also look for the ability to create a cap on what that budget is. If you don't know initially how much you're going to use in terms of tokens, most of these platforms do have a capability to create a cap and to be able to notify you or to stop the processes cold once it meets that threshold. That's what I would look at.
Lots of excellent advice. Christine in the chat also added, a mistake is not to educate staff and employees because they may not understand what it means to feed private data into the AI. So again, some of those guardrails around governance.
Absolutely. And I think, there is this whole terminology called shadow AI right now, is exactly the same thing that Christine just mentioned, right? And it is becoming more and more mainstream right now because, you're just taking Excel dumps of your data and putting it onto Cloud and ChatGPT and trying to get an analysis of it, right? So I think that is very important that employees or need to be aware that there are aspects to data security that has to be done. Personally identifiable information, PIIs. It's something that we have to look at it, and it also matters in if you are using an application where it is processing PII information, then how do you extract or how do you at least replace those kind of information before you send it to the LLMs, right? So yes, employees definitely need to be made aware of it. It is part of a continuous education that we all do, and information security. This is something much more required in the modern AI age.
Mike adds a comment, given the impact on an organization's workforce, it would seem to make sense for leadership to create a culture of curiosity about AI and where benefits can be gained by leveraging AI. It's important that leaders create that environment where people are more likely to embrace AI versus fear that it will replace them. Excellent comment. Yeah. Well, we're at our time. If our audience, whether live or watching later, has questions for our speakers, please feel free to send them. We will provide a copy of this recording with everyone who registered and also how you can get in touch with our speakers. Thank you to Roji, Roy, and Shai for sharing your expertise, and to everyone who joined us today and added their insights. You can find upcoming Montana High Tech Business Alliance events at mthightech.org/events. Thank you to Speridian Technologies for partnering with us on today's conversation, and we hope to see you at a future Alliance event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.